Welcome everyone to Honoring Proud Voices, our second installment. Last week we had an incredible speaker, and this week we have also another wonderful speaker. This is a continuation of our honoring series. We did Honoring Black Voices in February, and for Pride Month we're doing Honoring Proud Voices. I love the flag, Colleen. Yeah, so I'm gonna pass this off to Jill, and she's going to talk a little bit about living well, aging well.
So welcome, and thank you all for joining us for our second presentation of Proud Voices. I'm Jill Spazano. I am the Living Well, Aging Well Service Coordinator at Aquatic Park Center of the San Francisco Senior Center. Our Living Well, Aging Well has its roots in the knowledge it is the stories that will give us that deep insight into knowledge and understanding of the rich diversity and culture of our community. We are grateful to have you join us today. Using the modalities that are the foundation of Living Well, Aging Well, I've chosen a couple of them to share with you. The first one is always spirituality. San Francisco Senior Center is a safe, supportive place to experience life's journeys and enrich our purpose for existence. Environment. San Francisco believes that the harmony between our personal surrounding and nature are vital to maintaining our good health and fosters respect for self, other, and environment. And lastly, social. As we gather today, San Francisco is a caring community that encourages social interaction while emphasizing mutual respect. Thank you and welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Jill, and I'll take it over from here. So I'm very excited to bring this speaker to us today. This is Efraim Getahoon. He's the manager of community partnerships at Open House. And if you don't know, Open House is an incredible LGBTQ plus older adult serving organization in San Francisco, aiming to bring folks resources in housing, advocacy, artistic expression. They have a senior center over on Laguna and Market, as well as a couple senior housing buildings. And Ephraim is here today to talk to us about gender expression. So, which is something that we're really excited to bring to this Proud Voices series, because gender expression, honestly, well, one, it's a very important and represented element that falls under the umbrella of LGBTQ+, but it's also just misunderstood by those within this community, and especially those outside of the community. So Ephraim is gonna teach us, I'm sure, a lot today. So very excited to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for that eloquent introduction. Hello, everyone. Like Crystal said, my name is Efraim Getahoon. I am working on sharing my screen, so give me one moment. Okay, there we go. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. So that is exactly right. We're going to be talking about gender expression. We're going to be talking about some other things outside of expression as well, including identity, and really highlighting trans and gender nonconforming experiences. And so at Open House, the LGBT Senior Center, we call this training Trans 101. And so we're really going to be covering a considerable, quite a lot of information. The goal is for you to take 1-2 ideas, be exposed to some knowledge, and then go forth into the world armed with some information, so that as you engage with different identities, you might be a little bit better equipped to build genuine connections with other people in the LGBTQIA2F+ alphabet mafia people, right? So go ahead and start. So first things first, my name, like Crystal had said, is Efraim Getahoon. My pronouns are he, him. And usually when I do this in person, I'll kind of go around the room, listen to everyone's name, and listen to people mumble and stumble over saying their pronouns, sometimes for the first time, right? And really, this is something we'll touch on later, but it's a culture of inclusivity, right? To introduce your name, but then also with your name presenting your pronouns, because one, whether you think it's assumed or not, by presenting your pronouns, you're also signaling to other community members that, hey, this is a safe place. And if and when you do want to disclose that information, I'm really excited to embrace you and take you as your whole identity, right? So you guys got the lowdown about me. So we're going to talk about Open House very quickly, about their services and how we serve the community, right? So we are varying services just like every other nonprofit organization that's trying desperately to serve community members, sometimes at the most marginalized intersections. We have a case management department. We have our training and transformation department, which I oversee, which is exactly this. It's providing discussions and trainings. This training is actually one of many, a buffet of menu options of trainings to really target gaps in knowledge about how to serve LGBTQ seniors or older adults as well. And really that we go into long-term care facilities, we go into skilled nursing facilities, whatever the case, home health agencies, and really try to arm them with as much of the knowledge as possible to be competent with our community. We have support groups and social groups, there's lunches, there's the friendly visitor program that pairs queer youth with LGBTQ older adults. It's more of an intergenerational moment, but there's these connections oftentimes will outlive the program itself. And we've had friendships that have gone on for 6+ years from this program. And of course, we have our Aging and Disability Resource Center, that's housing, financial support, other things like helping people navigate applications for their gender marker changes or legal name changes, et cetera. So it kind of is a wide variety of services there. And then because of COVID, we ended up seeing this really food insecure community really present itself. And unbeknownst to us, although we should have really been aware of this, our community members had woven together a series of organizations based on their programs to show up for lunches, because oftentimes that might have been the only meal that they were getting for the day. And so what we realize is that that's not what we want community members to be coming to us for. The food is an accessory to the experience. It's supposed to be building community and enjoying food together and enjoying each other. So we don't want people coming to us because they haven't eaten today. We want that to be simply an accessory to the program, right? So there's a huge effort at Open House partnering with Marin Food Bank to deliver groceries to our community members and making sure that anyone that is in need of food can get it. And so that when they attend our programs, they're purely coming there because they want to, not out of some kind of need when it comes to their food. So that very broad covering of what the LGBTQ Senior Center Open House does. The one new addition is an adult day program that's opening next door to our office. Our office is at 65 Laguna and Market. However, next door at 75 Laguna, we're opening an adult day program called Community Day Services, and it's in partnership with Unlock. It's one of my biggest projects that I work on. I'm very excited about it. So if anyone wants any more information about any of the things that I've listed, please don't hesitate. I think at the end I have my email here. I'll definitely share my contact information with Crystal or someone who can disperse my contact in case anyone wants it. Okay, so let's have the conversation that we came here for, which is about gender expression, gender identity. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is ask 2 questions. These are rhetorical and no one has to answer them. It's just really to reflect. And the first question is, how often do you develop relationships with trans-identified older adults? Just think about that. I want you to kind of take a mental picture of all of the people that encompass your family, your friends, anyone that you think is your community, and just take a little census of who in that circle you recognize, that identifies as trans or gender nonconforming. And how much do you know about trans people and their issues, right? Because in order to understand aspects of the identity and the way it shows up, that means you also need to understand the person and aspects of their experience that they're experiencing every day, right? That could be equity issues is what I'm essentially referring to. And when I say this, like when I asked you to take a census of your friend group or your family or whatever the case might be, oftentimes, not always, you might have like, it might just be like a trans buffet within your friend group, but oftentimes it usually lends that people don't have that many trans identified or gender nonconforming people in their lives. And so when I think about crossing bridges or building bridges with communities, the radical act of making sure to have a diverse community that you're interacting with is vital, right? Because right now what we're going to be doing is theorizing about trans people. We're going to be learning about some information, maybe even some behavior interventions in order how to interact and honor trans people. But in order to truly understand and to truly connect with this community, you must go forth into this world after this presentation and build authentic, genuine connections with trans people. That's just it. And you can take that and apply it to Black people and their experiences, women and their experiences, like you can, older adults with ageism and their experiences, right? So really take a magnifying glass to the patterns of who we choose to connect with. And that's really going to, one, highlight who's not in our circles, and then go and build those genuine connections, right? Because it's not Pokemon. We're not just like trying to catch them all. We want to make sure that we have genuine connections with older adults and trans people, queer people, whatever the case might be. So I'm going to very quickly go over the whole rainbow of definitions that sit in the LGBTQIA2S+ acronym, just so that you have the information. And you'll notice on the left side, I'm going to quickly talk about sexual orientation because that's not really too relevant to our conversation today, but then we're going to kind of cover and define terms of gender identity, okay? So first, very quickly, the L of the LGBT, we're all pretty familiar with lesbian. It refers to any woman who is attracted to other women. Very simple. Oftentimes, lesbian people may also just call themselves gay. It's not uncommon to hear that, but that's just very quickly going to define that. Gay, then, is any man who's attracted to other men. Again, this is a pretty universal term. You'll hear it a lot across varying identities. Bisexual, this definition has changed a little bit because oftentimes we made it binary. We would say this is someone who's attracted to men and women, but the language is morphing to recognize that bisexuality really means that you're attracted to more than one gender. That could be you being attracted to men and women, you being attracted to men and non-binary people. It just can show up in many different ways. Queer, this is a complicated one. Put an asterisk there for that reason, because queer means any variation of sexual orientations or gender expressions or gender identities and messing with them and turning them inside out. However, it's also a derogatory term to a lot of community members, and it depends on where you sit on a generation. It's just a generational thing. I think for a lot of younger queer people, they've reclaimed that term and taken on a term that in the past was used as a slur. So I've noticed when older adults at Open House at the LGBT Senior Center hear queer, they're like, don't ever call me that. I never want to hear that again, etc. Right? So usually I put an asterisk here because I want people to wait for someone to self-identify as queer before you would ever name them as such. And we just want to be sensitive to folks that have been very harmed by this word in the past. Asexuality, asexual is a kind of a spectrum. It's really people that may have little or no sexual attraction to any gender. Like I said, it's a spectrum. It's not black and white where someone just doesn't have any sexual interest in partners. So yeah, I'd really like to think about it as a spectrum. Heterosexuality is any person who's attracted to quote unquote the opposite gender. So that could look like a cis man and a cis woman being attracted, and we'll talk about what cis means. That could be a trans man with a cis woman, or any combination of those kind of opposing gender not opposing, I don't want to use opposing, but opposite genders, yeah. And then pansexual, this one's a little bit of it's gained a lot of traction. It's not necessarily a new term, but it's being used more often in the LGBTQ community. And pansexual means that gender and someone's sexual orientation plays no role in your desire to, or like in your attraction to them, right? So when you're approaching someone, the gender that they choose to embody, their sexual orientation doesn't matter. Really, you just see the person for who they are outside of these confinements of gender identity and sexual orientation. Pansexual and bisexual, sometimes people get a little confused about that, but remember, it's more than one gender that you are attracted to with bisexuality, and with pansexual, it's just gender and sexuality doesn't matter. So now we're going to really touch on the gender identities, right? So transgender is a very broad umbrella term that covers a lot of different identities, but just recognize a very simple way of understanding the definition of what transgender means is any person whose gender identity differs from the sex they were assigned at birth, okay? If anyone at any point, though this is very didactic and I'm kind of just preaching at you, at any point if there's a question, don't hesitate to unmute and interrupt me and ask, okay? I know because sometimes people have the burning questions sitting at the forefront of their minds and they just don't want, that's all they're gonna focus on until the end of the presentation. Next, we have genderqueer or gender non-binary. These are people that do not fit in the binary that we've created, that the society has created, because we've created it's either man or woman, it's right, boy or girl. When someone's pregnant and we're getting excited about this child coming into the world, we are so focused on the potential gender of this child, right? So someone who, and the genders are, to society's understanding, male or female, or man or woman. And so genderqueer or gender non-binary people do not sit in that binary. They may be somewhere in the middle. They may be completely outside of the binary, but they, yeah, so that's a perfect example. So anyone who's shifting in that binary or outside of the binary entirely. Two-spirit, this is only for Native American communities, indigenous people to this land who will use the term two-spirit, but it's just important to name it because the identity exists. But two-spirit is similar to genderqueer, gender non-binary, but again, it's only reserved for the Native and indigenous communities because colonization is really what brought a lot of the understandings of gender and the way that it should be presented. So even language like genderqueer or gender non-binary may still be like quote unquote a colonized language for indigenous people to use when describing their identity and their experience. Cisgender, this is the one, right? Because people are very familiar, or at least have heard the word transgender, but cisgender may have, some people may not be familiar with it. And cisgender is any person whose sex assigned at birth, or excuse me, gender identity. So any person whose gender identity matches with the sex they were assigned at birth. So if you were, if a doctor looked at you when you were born, looked at your organs and was like, that's a boy, and then you grew up and you lived your life and you're like, oh, I'm a man, and it doesn't bring you any weird feelings to live in that identity, and you're not in crisis over experiencing the identity of being a man, then you are a cisgender person. And really, the reason why it's important to name or to have a vocabulary for cisgender people is because language is important. And so often when it comes to race, white is the default, right? So when it comes to gender, the binary is the default. So cisgender people would be considered, what society says is normal. So it's important to name cisgender and transgender because then it puts it on equal footing, right? And one of them is not the default. We have language for cisgender, which is anyone whose gender identity aligns with their sex assigned at birth. And then intersex. This is not a gender identity. That's very important to name. I just put it here because I didn't know which, it's not a sexual orientation either. But intersex is a myriad of biological conditions, right? It can look like different gonads, different reproductive systems, and this is a biological condition, many different conditions. And really a lot of intersex people may not be aware that they're intersex. In fact, oftentimes an autopsy will reveal that they had varying organs that usually are male or usually are female, etc. So that is the identity of intersex. And then, of course, the LGBTQIA2S+, which is just the acronym covering all of the terms that I've just defined here. So now that I've just bored you to death with all of these definitions, we're going to move forward with really the trans experience, because I think it's just important to have these defined so that if I use this language in the presentation, you're going to be aware of what I'm talking about. I see something in the chat. Trans buffet, yes, exactly, Crystal. I love that you picked that up. Okay,
Can I
so
ask, real quick,
Yeah.
Ephraim, I'm sure you're going to go into this, so no need to answer it now, but just to ask again more specifically on those terms, the difference between genderqueer and transgender.
Sure, no problem.
Now or later.
Okay, yeah, let's do it now. So when we talk about transgender, it's actually a much broader term, I think, than gender non-binary or gender queer. Transgender is this super huge umbrella. And I think I have an image of that next, but which actually includes things that I don't agree with are trans. However, transgender is a huge umbrella. Gender non-binary people would fit under that. Trans women would fit under that. Trans men would fit under that umbrella, right? But gender queer or gender non-binary is a very specific subset of the transgender experience, where these are people that do not fit in the binary boxes that we've created in the society of man or woman, right? These are people, just think of if that binary sits there, literally lift that person out of that binary and bring them over here, because you don't like using that. And oftentimes, let me back up here a second. When you are encountering a person, you're looking at their body and immediately you've imposed lots of assumptions about their gender identity, and when we talk about gender identity, that also informs a lot of societal expectations, right? If you were assigned female at birth and then grow up to be a woman, there's lots of expectations about your role in the society, your role in reproduction and the patriarchy and how it controls. And so there's a lot of expectations that are outlined when you're assigned a gender, right? So gender non-binary people or gender queer people are removed from that measurement, right, from those boxes. And there's many reasons for why people choose, or not choose, but why people are gender non-binary or gender queer. So however, so that's the best, just remove them from that binary, because transgender people can be binary. A trans person can choose to be, like go through transitions or whatever the case might be, and express their gender as a woman, and that's a trans woman, and that is a binary expression of transness. That's a lot of information. We're going to actually break that down a little bit later, okay? So some terms to very quickly talk about, because we're going to break these down a little bit later, are sex assigned at birth, gender identity, and sexual orientation. And the reason why it's important to show you that these are different things is because, again, when a child comes into this earth and we name their sex, and then of course their gender follows, and then there are a million other expectations. And oftentimes what we forget is that all of these parts are completely separate. Your sex assigned at birth is one category, and that's purely what a doctor has looked at your organs and said, because of these organs, this is your sex. Then there's your gender identity. Your gender identity is purely what you feel it is. Your gender identity is your own, and it is it's purely what you feel inside is your gender identity. And then your sexual orientation is who you're attracted to, right? But so often we kind of mush all that together because, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but based on that sex that you're assigned at birth, then it's assumed that we understand your gender. And then it's assumed if we understand your gender, who you're going to be attracted to, right? All of those just kind of in succession. The minute that child is born into this world, all of that is assumed. So like I said, transgender, or trans for short, huge umbrella term for people whose gender identity is different from their assigned sex at birth. So common understandings of that: a transgender woman, trans female, is a person who lives as and is a woman. And then a transgender man or trans male is a person who lives as and is a man. So these are the binary understandings. These are the most, when you think of transness, this is probably what you're thinking about, although it's much more complex than this. I see something in the chat. Let me see what's going on. Yes, yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Gender fluid people can, one day they really feel aligned with a gender identity, and you'll notice that they're asking to be named by he, him pronouns. Maybe another day they wake up and they feel more aligned with they, them pronouns, and they'll ask you to not, gender in that way. And so I think what's really is, for some people, they're like, how can I keep up? But at the end of the day, it's actually speaks to how beautifully complex the human the human condition is, right? Like, you are not just you're never in one static place. You're constantly evolving and growing and changing. And so gender fluid people really are exercising that, not only in their own individual reflection, but then asking also those that care about them in society to recognize that they are not static, definitive, in any given moment, just that one definition of existence. So here's this umbrella. I don't agree with about half of the things that are named in here. Things that I wouldn't agree with, for example, are like drag kings and drag queens, cross-dressing. These are elements of gender expression that may be aligned with gender identity, but really we want to think about third gender, gender non-binary, gender fluid, transgender. That is this massive umbrella. So there's just this little visual to help you understand.
It's almost like that should say gender expression instead of
yes,
transgender,
I agree.
right?
I agree. Absolutely. And you'll even see words like transsexual, right? This is essentially a derogatory term now. Like, you would never approach a trans person and say that they're transsexual, but I encounter every day queer seniors, trans seniors, specifically trans women, who that's just the idea, like that's just a reclaiming of it, and that's what they know. And so I'm not going to tell you what your identity is. That's your business, right? So I honor it with them, but moving out in the world, I would never use the term transsexual. So what's the problem with normal?
Real quick, Ephraim, I just saw a chat from David that he asked you to explain HIJRA.
Was that, what does that stand for?
I didn't see it under the umbrella, but David.
That was listed in the previous.
Yes. Yeah, sorry. Thank you so much. That is a third gender in South Asia.
South Asia. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I thought that was an acronym. And for example, I'm Ethiopian, and there were third genders before colonization over Africa. But so varying ethnic backgrounds will have different language for it. Thank you so much for that question. Oh, so what is the problem with normal, right? So like I spoke earlier, there's a lot that we throw in assumption the moment a child is born. Sometimes not even before that child is born. Sometimes the gender reveal party is done. And then from the get-go, maybe 6 months into the pregnancy, we've decided a lot about that person's life without their consent, right? So when a child is born, a doctor looks at that child's organs and says, oh, that child has a vagina. That child will grow up to be, that child is then a female. That female should grow up to be a girl. That girl should grow up to be a woman. That woman should be feminine, and that feminine woman should be attracted to men, right? That is all presumed the minute sex is assigned at birth, and of course the domino effects that follow from there. And then of course on the flip side, a child is born with a penis. The doctor says, oh, this is a male. That male is expected. That boy should be a man. That man should be masculine. That masculine man should be attracted to women, right? That's the expectation. But we know that that is not always the case. It's absolutely not always the truth. And so what we want to consider is that our bodies do not determine our gender. right? So for example, this is an image of a trans man who's gone through some transitionary work, and you can see is visibly pregnant, right? So our body, like according to society, no man can possibly be pregnant. However, here, behold, a man who is pregnant, right? So if we can remove this expectation that our bodies are going to then determine our gender, we can understand that it also doesn't define who we will fall in love with, right? Or be sexually attracted to. Women aren't always feminine. There are plenty, and even if you removing sexual orientation out of it, because there's a lot of understanding of, for example, lesbian women, there's a stereotype that, most of them are butch and more masculine, but there are plenty of heterosexual women that choose not to present in how society deems a woman should present, right? So masculinity can present in women. And of course, on the flip side, men aren't always masculine, right? Men can be soft and tender. And what society says is feminine, right? So yes, that's one example. And trans women and cis women oftentimes use pronouns like she, her, right? Trans men and cis men may use pronouns like he, him. And genderqueer, gender non-binary people, they may use pronouns like they, them. They may use she, her. They may use he, him. They may use all of them. They may use two of them. The understanding is that we are removing any of those expectations. And so gender non-binary really get a beautiful experience of kind of choosing for themselves how they want to be, not only how they want to experience the world, but how they want the world to experience them, right? And I know when we get to this part, this is kind of where some folks sometimes are like, okay, this is where you lost me. The non-binary identity or genderqueer identity is something that for some reason, a lot of us have a hard time understanding. And a very simple example of the way that you actually use gender neutral language all the time, it would be, for example, I came to the senior center and I left my phone at the front desk and no one saw me leave it there. Let's say a receptionist came and saw the phone, they would say, hey, someone left their phone here. If that person gets here, let them know that I have their phone, right? So we use gender neutral. Because the phone was left there without anyone seeing it, the person, we don't know. All of the assumptions that we want to do about the person's gender identity, we don't have that information because we usually base gender identity off of the body that we're encountering, right? So we use gender neutral language all the time with ease, but it's as soon as we encounter a person and witness with our own eyes their bodies and what we assume that means, that we suddenly start tripping up on our words and screwing it up and having a hard time understanding why we're using they, them pronouns for people, right? So what I suggest is actually a lifelong journey of unpacking what gender actually means. Because today's presentation, once I'm done later on, really is only going to have giving you some information, some terms, basic concepts and information, and then it's behavioral approaches, right? It's like a behavioral intervention of how to interact with trans people, but you're actually needing to do some deeper work about unpacking why we approach gender the way that we do in order for you to truly understand the non-binary experience. I think, and from my friends that are non-binary, what they've expressed to me is that they can tell very much so when someone is using they, them pronouns for them, but still seeing them as the gender or the sex that they were assigned at birth. You know what I mean? And all that we're doing is masking. It's essentially, I've trained my brain enough that although, she, her wants to come out, I'm still saying they, them. And so that is just a behavioral change, which is still important. It's still important because we need to honor and respect trans people. And it's honestly, as direct as this is going to sound, it's literally going to save lives. It's literal suicide prevention to honor people's gender identities and their pronouns. But I really implore people to do deeper work with themselves, with other people, to understand why gender presents itself in our society the way it does, and how limiting it is, not only for people that want to break out of these boxes, but also for us, for ourselves. Even those that identify, even those of us that identify in the binary, it's almost like, you know, it's really like, really understanding what does being a man for me mean? And why is it so important, right? So anyway, I could go on forever. So we're going to use me as an example, because sometimes still to this point, it might be a little bit difficult to kind of parse out these four categories, right? Sex assigned at birth, your gender identity, your gender expression, which is something we haven't talked about yet, and your sexual orientation, these four different pieces. And you can see here on this nice little moment here that I've created, that it's a very, in layman's terms, kind of describes what each means. So sex assigned at birth, what the doctor said when you were born, right? M or F or I, intersex, can be an option that might be on a birth certificate. But those are the only three options that they will provide people. I think things might be changing, but currently that's what it is. Then gender identity, that's how I feel inside. No one can take that away from me. In fact, this presentation is, I'm never interested in convincing people that trans people are legit, like these are legitimate identities. I'm not interested in convincing people of that. This is just the truth. Whether people are ready to get on the train and join us is a whole different part, right? So how you feel on the inside, no one can take that from you. And so that is your gender identity. And then your gender expression. It's how you present that gender out into the world and how people will view you based on that expression, right? So how you present yourself to others. And then sexual orientation, super simple, who am I attracted to, okay? So using me as an example, when I was born, the doctor looked at me and was like, that's a male, and they slapped it on my birth certificate. It says M right there on the birth certificate. Then as I started being conditioned by society, I grew up and I was a boy and I grew up. And then as an adult, I do still identify as a man, as a cis man. There's no, I don't have any turmoil over that identity. It doesn't cause me any harm. So in my lived experience as an adult, I do identify as a man. But my gender expression is a little bit not, you know, because the gender expression of a cis man should be to be masculine and, you know, whatever else it is that men do. And so really where I sit is actually on somewhere in the androgynous, maybe a little bit to the right, and maybe a little bit to the left. I don't really know. It's really dependent on the day. I like things that society deems are more feminine. I love makeup. I'm not wearing any today, unfortunately. I should have actually put on a look. It would have been really lovely. I love my nail polish. You know, I love all of these things that aren't inherently feminine, but society has prescribed them to be feminine. I love playing with all of those things. My headscarves, and, you know, I just love to be able to present myself in this way. But then my sexual orientation, a little bit more to the right. I'm attracted to other men and masculine people of varying identities, like non-binary folks that might be more mask presenting, cis men that are cis men. And then trans men also. So it's like all men I'm fairly attracted to, but then it's as I get older, the more confused I get about my sexual orientation. So I've noticed I'm starting to lean more into the middle, and who knows, as I evolve, maybe it's a pansexual moment, who knows. So this, I hope, really breaks down in as basic as I possibly could, because I think using me as an example sometimes helps, sometimes it doesn't help. But it really just frames all of the language that we've been using and all of the definitions to break it down, just so you can see literally as a cis man and as a queer person, this is how, in all of those categories, this is where I sit. And for a moment, while you're looking at this, I challenge you just to look at these four categories and ask yourself, like, where do I fit in these different categories? And it's interesting because if you were, you know, a cis person who's heterosexual, you might never think of these things. These might be things that you never even consider, because society is designed for cis people that are heterosexual. From birth, the the road that was built for cis heterosexual people, those bricks that were laid out for you, it's easy to walk on that road and it doesn't cause you any harm. But for many other people, they think about these things every day, right? Oftentimes, especially the gender expression and the sexual orientation piece, those two things can lead to people being victimized, murdered. There are lots of aspects about playing with gender expression and sexual orientation. The way society is designed and the way the patriarchy is designed, it actually it's an affront to be somewhere, you know, fluid on this spectrum. It is a direct attack against the very firm structures and systems that we have in place, right? And so that elicits really, really, really problematic reactions from other community members or other people in the society, right? I know I'm talking, there's lots of big ideas that I'm talking about. There's just no way we would ever have time to delve into the patriarchy and delve all these things. It's important to name them. I have a video clip that really breaks down everything that I've talked about really well. He talks a little bit fast. I talk a little bit fast too, so I'm hoping maybe I'll slow down and be a little bit more intentional with my speech, because I realize I get so excited about the topics and then I'm rushing through it. So I'm gonna play this video. 1 second. Let me stop sharing. You can witness me, and I'm going to find. That's it. Oh, here it is. Okay, over here. And I'm going to share my screen again. This guy's great. I really like this guy. Okay, share and make sure to optimize sound. Perfect.
Today, we plumb the depths of the marvelously complex human. But first, allow me to acknowledge that I am not a sociologist. I'm also a straight white man who doesn't have to worry about a lot of the hate that a lot of other people
we
do
don't
have to
see
worry
the
about.
video.
My goal with this video is I want people.
We saw
thank you.
a Word doc. I think it maybe it covered it.
Maybe now. Do you
So it flashes and then it goes away.
Here you go. How about now?
There it is. There it is.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for saying that.
The depths of the marvelously complex human. But first, allow me to acknowledge that I am not a sociologist. I'm also a straight white man who doesn't have to worry about a lot of the hate that a lot of other people do have to worry about. But my goal with this video is I want people to understand, because I think understanding will lead to less hate and also less self-hate. For a lot of people, it's nice to imagine that humans are simple and that you can know a person's sex and then you will know all sorts of things about them deeply and clearly. And if you don't fit into this nice little box, people who do can get really confused and sometimes even angry. And if you yourself don't fit into one of these nice little boxes and you think that people should, then you end up hating yourself. And that's probably even worse. I think the best and maybe only way to solve this problem is for people to understand that there are no nice shiny boxes. Or if there are shiny boxes, there are an infinite number of them, enough to put all of the people who currently exist, have ever existed, and will ever exist. So, together, let's understand. We're gonna start simple. What's going on down here in between the legs? That is your sex, your biological sex, and it tends to be binary, though there are all sorts of conditions that result in intersex individuals. And as interesting and complicated as this is, the rest of it is much more complicated, so I'm just gonna move on from here, because we all kind of get what sex is. Now we move on up to the top, to the brain, which is the thing that decides what gender you identify with, whether you feel like a man or a woman or neither or both, because the fascinating thing is, as much as we try to label things, there is no way to label every point on an infinite continuum, and that's what we're dealing with here. So, to actually visualize how this works, I've created a graph for you. On the x-axis, we have gender, male to female, and on the y-axis, we have the intensity of the identification with that gender. I would be about here, because I identify as a man, though I recognize that there are some woman-y parts of me, but let's also put a hypothetical biological female on the graph that identifies very strongly as a man. Now, that could be really uncomfortable, especially when there's a bunch of people in the world who insist on calling him a woman just because of the body that he happens to be very uncomfortable with. Which is why sex does not determine the pronoun you should use. Gender does. Now, moving on to your heart, your metaphorical heart, of course. This is who you're attracted to. Men, women, all genders. Again, it's a spectrum, and that spectrum includes intensity, because there are people who don't feel strong sexual attraction at all. That's why asexual is a sexual orientation. A newer idea that I was happy to be exposed to yesterday on Tumblr is the idea of romantic orientation. These are the people that you want to have strong, intimate relationships with, but it sort of separates out the idea that sex has to be the goal or end point or like end all and be all of every intimate relationship. Now that we've dealt with how we feel, let's deal with what happens when other people actually get involved. That's sexual behavior, which is actually very different from sexual orientation. Now that might seem a little bit strange at first, but it's not. Consider, for example, a heterosexual priest. That priest's orientation is heterosexual, but because of his religion, his behavior is celibate. Here we're not talking about the preference, we're talking about the behavior. Now built on top of all of this are gender roles, which are built by societies, not by individuals. The obvious ones are masculine gender roles and feminine gender roles, but as all dichotomies are false dichotomies, this one is a spectrum too. Now that we've sort of gone over all of this, it's important to note that every single one of these categories is independent from each other. So a biological female can be a man who only has sex with women despite the fact that he's attracted to both men and women and kind of, feels more comfortable in feminine gender roles. That may not be the most common combination of these factors, but it's certainly not weird. And another important point, many people move across these spectrums, sometimes from year to year, sometimes hour to hour. But what's really important is that we trust ourselves and we understand ourselves and we love and respect ourselves and we grant that same understanding and respect to the people around us. Because when the world becomes one of infinite continuums and those false dichotomies break down and those two shiny boxes break apart into 7 billion shiny boxes, it's actually pretty beautiful. John, I'll see you on Tuesday.
Okay. Very quickly, just gave us a whirlwind. I know that's just like
That was a whirlwind.
your head is probably spinning, but he touches on a lot of really, really important points. And the literal one that you can walk away from is the statement where he said, there's no way that there are two shiny boxes, right? If anything, there's an infinite amount, one to embody every single person who's alive today, whoever was alive and whoever will be alive in the future, right? So the understanding is just to come, whether after this conversation you then have an inkling of an understanding of the trans experience, it's the desire to see the human and to recognize the whole person, and that comes from a place of empathy. And so one thing that I usually talk about at this point is some of the barriers that keep people from wanting to, navigate the world with different identities, whether it's trans folks or gender non-binary people. And there are, whether it's religious expectations, whether it's society, whether it's cultural, all of those barriers, these are things, or not barriers, I shouldn't say barriers, these are just aspects of people's lives. But it's very easy to recognize what is important to you within yourself. These are your morals, your values, your understanding of your cultural expectations, etc., ethnic background, all of those things. It's very easy to see what's important to you. What's very difficult is when you encounter another person and trying to understand what's important to them. And I think what ends up, I'm not an expert. I'm an Ethiopian person ethnically, and my father's a pastor. And both from a cultural and a religious aspect, my gender identity isn't something difficult for them to understand, obviously, because I'm a cis man. It's my sexual orientation that they couldn't stomach. So the religious and cultural expectations of the Ethiopian experience are what they couldn't compromise. And to me, I think it would have been really beautiful if me and my family could have blended what is important to me and what is important to them, right? That is the literal definition of cultural humility, is to come to a place of not compromise. Because you don't compromise your values, you don't compromise your culture when you honor another person. In fact, the blending of that is the most important aspect of interacting with other people in a society, and especially one as diverse as ours. So I don't know why I went on that little rabbit hole, but I guess one point that is really, really important when it comes to the trans experience intersecting with our older adults is that many of them now, as they've aged and are starting to need support and entering into long-term care facilities or skilled nursing facilities or whatever the case might be, they're being forced to closet themselves. And to me, when I think about the loss that I had to endure just in my family in order for me to be who I am, it is worth it, frankly, because it was going to be my own life if I hadn't chosen this. And so when I think about my trans community members and the seniors that have gone through unimaginable loss, not only in their families, but their community, even the L, the G, and the B, do you think that they're like super welcoming to trans people? No, of course not. So it's like, even within the queer community, they're always on the peripheral, right? Always on the outside. So after all of that loss, for them to closet themselves later, it's almost like, what's the point, right? And so I refuse to age in a world where I can't thrive and I can't be successful. And in order for me to eradicate that kind of ageism, transphobia, homophobia, we have to address it today. But it also comes from a selfish place because I want to be able to thrive when I'm older as well, right? So I'm going to pause there. I actually have a lot more in this presentation, but I just realized we're at 156 and we've moved. I don't know, maybe I talked too much. So I want to pause and give people an opportunity to make comments, to ask questions. You can just say hi, whatever you're feeling. I gave a lot of information, so I'm happy to touch on any of the topics we discussed as well.
I just want to say that the rabbit hole you went down was like the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life. Just the not compromising, you're just opening yourself up for someone. You're not giving up yourself. That was amazing.
Good.
I had a question, but now I forgot. I just wanted to say that first.
Thank you so much, Crystal. I appreciate that.
I'm just wondering, since I live in San Francisco and I interact with all my fellow San Franciscans, and I think that what I do is when I see a man or woman, I assign and think they're man or women, but should I be asking at the top, as soon as I meet new people, what do you identify as? I'm just asking. I don't know.
I think
I don't want to make a mistake.
No. This is a fantastic question. I don't know about walking around and like, what's your gender identity? Because some people,
yes.
You're thinking about so many other factors because you're coming from a good place because you want to honor them, but maybe not out, maybe the social setting might be a little bit too public, etc. Right? There's lots of reasons why that might not be an appropriate question right off the bat. The way that I do it is I just start with my name and my pronouns. So, and it's a little funny saying it the first many times. And sometimes you'll get some looks because cis people that don't have to think about this are like, what the hell, I don't need to hear, I don't care what your pronouns are, I don't need to hear that. But
could you give me an example? Like how would you say that if we never meet?
Yeah, how do you pronounce your name?
It's Gaya, G-A-Y-A.
Okay, perfect. So hi Gaya, my name's Ephraim, my pronouns are he, him.
Oh, so you say your pronoun like that. Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Does everyone do that? Is everyone conscious like that?
Yeah, so this is where not everyone isn't conscious like that. There are going to be people, if they're in the LGBTQ community, and especially if they're trans, this is normal culture to announce your pronouns. There are going to be people that just look at you and think, okay, thanks so much for that. I didn't need that information. But simply saying those pronouns like that, he, him, she, her, they, them, it immediately, unfortunately, what ends up happening is trans people are the ones that always have to come out, and cis people never do, right? Because we never have to think about it. So if I'm presenting my pronouns, it's signaling, hey, this is a welcoming opportunity. If you choose to, if you want to present your gender identity, you're more than welcome. It signals a lot when you say your pronouns.
Okay, I got it.
They are
because I've been corrected before. I have been corrected before, and so I appreciate the correction. So
Yeah.
then I won't bumble so much.
Well, you bring up a wonderful other point, which is what do you do when you screw up? Because it's going to happen. One thing to consider is that we've been conditioned our whole lives to look at people's bodies and then immediately assign their gender, right?
Yes.
But one thing is the parallel work, which is unpacking all of this, conditioning. But then, secondly, it's like the mistakes are going to happen, and it's what do you do? It's really what is the action afterwards, that after the screw up has happened, after you've misgendered someone, right? That's the language that's used. What do we do? And oftentimes what ends up happening is this like performance of an apology, because you do feel bad, but your performance puts a huge burden on the person who's receiving this apology, because it looks like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, like, and you're just ending up equating your own guilt, and you're expecting them to carry that burden of like, not only have I been harmed now by being misgendered, but now I have to also like console you and be like, no, it's okay, oh my God, it's fine, no big deal.
I got it.
So that it's just being very like hearing the criticism, and sometimes it might be a triggered response, and right so, right? Like if I experience a racist encounter, even if it's like a a little under the radar kind of racism, I'm going to have a little bit of a triggered response, and it might not be like, "Hi, I'm so sorry, that was racist. Please don't say that again," right? And it might be a little bit more pointed and direct than that. But taking in that criticism, sitting with that, and saying, "Sorry, I'll do better moving forward," and really, your apology will actually sit when your behavior changes. Because sorry is a word, and the actual apology sits in correcting the behavior that was wrong, right?
I see.
So thank you so much for that question.
And I noticed too that with intersex, I saw something briefly that said that intersex also deals with X and Y chromosomes. So I was surprised about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's actually, intersex is such a broad variety of conditions. I mean, it's almost impossible to name them all, but you're right. Yeah.
That made me think, should we all be tested?
Yeah, I would. For some people, there is no. It's not. It's because of so many different conditions and so many different ways that it can present. It could be someone who was assigned female at birth, identifies as a woman, and quote unquote looks like what we think a cis woman should look like, and yet has more male reproductive system, inside. So it's like gonads, reproductive systems, like so many different aspects of our reproductive system, or that comes in many variations with intersex people.
Ephraim, oh my gosh, this was just unbelievably amazing. Thank you so much. You are a beautiful being, Catherine. I'm stealing that from you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Seriously.
Thank you. It was very good.
Thank you.
Very refreshing and hopeful. I feel
Good.
like there's hope when you educate people. I think that's very hopeful.
I agree.
Thank you for being so heartfelt. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much.
The quote of the day is your ending quote. You call it your rabbit hole, but that was beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Come back one time.
I will. Yeah, we'll connect. I'll connect with Crystal and
yeah, we got to get him back.
Yeah, we'll talk soon for sure. All right, everyone.
Thanks, Ephraim. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here.
I'm very proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's so beautiful.
Hey, Eddie.
I'm just getting this is more for me now. At this point, I showed up for me. This isn't even for y'all. So thank you. Thank you. All right,
Thank
bye.
you so much.
Be well.
Bye.
Bye.